legislation that would have made it more difficult for voters to use absentee ballots. We knew that the Republican Secretary of State was going to bow to the pressure from President Trump, and he would rescind the smart decision he made to expand access to every Georgian who is eligible to vote. And so we are working right now to make certain that those ballots, those applications get to the voters who need to have it. It's wonderful when the state actually serves its people, but we've lived here long enough to know that we can't count on that from Rassenberger. But what we also know is that we saw an incredible amount of participation from communities that normally don't use absentee ballots. Part of that is driven by COVID-19, but part of it is also driven by the education and the work that we did in 2018 to expand access to absentee ballots. We know that absentee ballots will be one of the ways Democrats can show up in this election. But let's remember, voting by mail is as much about safety as it is about winning an election. And we don't want, in the state of Georgia, where we have a governor who is doing his level best to ensure the spread of infection in a state where we already have 156,000 people who have this disease in the first wave. We know that absentee ballots can be one of the few ways we can protect our people so they can participate in the democracy without risking their lives.
It was the very beginning of April, Friday night, April 3rd, when one of the world's top infectious disease doctors, Dr. David Ho, showed us these graphs laying out the two paths we had to choose from in our response to the coronavirus. They're supposed to represent a different state.
Again.
The first scenario was called simultaneous.
That's the thing.
It showed what would happen shut down at the same time to get the virus under control. We did it all as one. In that scenario, the virus gets stamped out at once all across the country, with each state, the hard-hit states and the less hard-hit states, all parts of the country fighting the virus as a united front. Scenario one, simultaneous action. The second scenario was called sequential. And this shows what happened if every state shut down and reopened at their own pace. If we didn't fight the virus as one nation, but instead we did it as 50 different states. Each one pursuing their own efforts against the virus only when things got demonstrably bad.
I know, and you know what that means.
Well, the consequences of that approach were clear from early April. They were clear to Dr. David Ho. Right? The consequence of choosing a sequential approach, a 50-state strategy for the virus, would result in a prolonged epidemic, more infections, more death, and look at when the time arrives at which this thing resolves. Ultimately, it would take us as a country much, much longer for us to get this thing under control, after much more pain, if we let all different parts of the country act on their own time frame instead of all acting at once. Nevertheless, it's that second scenario that we chose. And it's the reason behind our sustained, raging pandemic that just won't win. I mean, Dr. Ho's prediction back in the first week of April about what a sequential response to the pandemic would look like was a devastating prediction. It ultimately turned out to be exactly right. Imagine if we had listened to him then. Imagine if we had followed that science. Of our lives now as Americans, that we have a president who says very disruptive, very shocking things. Now, frequently the president says these shocking things on the hearing of the outside world. We just get reporting about them, right? Like the time last year when he asked a room full of lawmakers in the Oval Office about immigration policies for countries including Haiti and El Salvador and several different countries in Africa. The president reportedly asked those lawmakers in the Oval Office, well, why are we having all these people from bleep-hole countries come here? He said that inside the White House, inside the Oval Office, and the multiple people who heard him say it were so shocked that his comments ended up making their way outside the White House into the national news. Now, depending on your perspective, what the president said that day poured in after. That's one of the ways this happens around him. There was also the time during the campaign when it emerged that he'd been riding around in 2005 on the Access Hollywood bus talking about grabbing women by the privates and how they let you do that when you're a star. Again, it was, in that case, that was on tape, and it was, again, something shocking. We had the audio tape of that. It was shocking to hear a major party nominee for the office of President of the United States talking like that. But again, he said it. That tape sat around for a long time. It eventually came out during the campaign. There was a tornado. He weathered the criticism that poured in after those remarks.
Again.
I mean, mostly what happens is, President says shocking things. It upends 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 news cycles, depending on how shocking. And then he weathers it, and then gradually equilibrium gets restored until new shocking things said by President. Rinse, cycle, repeat.
I'm going 7.
On occasion, though, our president with this tendency to say shocking things. On occasion, he manages to say something that is not merely shocking, it turns out to be consequential. On occasion, he managed to say something so shocking that it isn't just short-term disruptive, it maybe changes the course of history, because it's something that sticks and it's something big.
I was going to fire company. There's no good time to do it, by the way.
Because if your letter, you said I accepted their recommendations. You had already made the decision.
Oh, I was going to fire regardless of recommendation. He made a recommendation. He's highly respected. Very good guy, very smart guy. The Democrats like him, the Republicans like him. He made a recommendation. But regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire company. There was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
But the president told NBC News' Lester Holt that day, saying he had the Russia investigation in mind when he decided, I know there's no good time to do it, but I gotta fire the FBI director. When he said that one, yeah, that was shocking, but that was more than shocking. I mean, first of all, the president said that in public, on audio and videotape. He came right out and said it to the anchor of a major national newscast on tape. And when he said that about firing the FBI director because of Russia, that stuck because he raised a lasting legal question. 6 weeks before, James Comey had confirmed for Congress that the FBI was investigating the Trump campaign and whether it worked with the Russian government during Russia's attempts to Comey revealed to the House Intelligence Committee on March 20th, 2017, that the investigation at the FBI was underway. The president then fired James Comey on May 9th, and it was 2 days later that the president explained what he had not previously made public.
And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
So we are used to this cycle, right? From back through the campaign, maybe even from back before the campaign, maybe just him as a public figure, but certainly him as a political figure. We're used to this cycle, right? Trump says, shocking thing. People are shocked. Some level of criticism levied at Trump because of shocking thing he said. Trump weathers criticism. The country moves on. Like, we're used to this cycle, right? I think the president does it on purpose a lot of times because he enjoys that cycle. But when he said this thing about firing Comey because of the Russia investigation, I mean, that wasn't just your typical shocking thing. That was potentially an admission of criminal behavior, an admission specifically of criminal intent, right? But what the president did there was he drew a connection between the investigation into his campaign about Russia and his decision to fire the man in charge of that investigation. And so that raised the question as to whether or not the president had just confessed to the criminal intent necessary to prove criminal obstruction of justice. The firing of James Comey and, to a certain extent, what the president said about why he did it ultimately led to the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller and the Mueller investigation to look into, among other things. Now we've got these multiple expanding investigations still going on in response from the Trump campaign when the Russians came calling in 2016 with an offer of dirt on Hillary Clinton. Right? Donald Trump Jr. wrote back almost at once, "If it is what you say, I love it." Right? A foreign adversary, longtime foreign adversary, comes calling, offering one presidential campaign dirt on their opponent. The future president's own eldest son says, "Oh yeah, the Russians have dirt to offer on our opponent. I love it. Let's hear it. Let's set up the meeting." Donald Trump Jr. got that message in June 2016. Today, 3 years later, June 2019, he's back on Capitol Hill today, testifying in the Senate Intelligence Committee. They called him back in part because they're trying to figure out whether Donald Trump Jr. Was telling the truth about how much his father knew about that offer from the Russians and that subsequent meeting with the Russians to get dirt on Trump's presidential campaign opponent. And this situation here presents a couple of particular difficulties for the president and his family. I mean, first of all, there's the question of whether the president's son lied to Congress at any point. Members of Congress have said that they suspect he has done so. So he's back under oath today. There's the question of whether or not he has told any lies that could potentially pose legal jeopardy. Secondly, there's the question of whether getting help for a political campaign from a foreign source is illegal, right? How that meets up with the federal laws about what campaigns in this country are allowed to do. Those are questions that tend to stick. Those questions have stuck. If you spent all of your presidency so far dealing with those questions, beating them back, fending them off, you may want to rethink going down that road if the choice got presented to you again. But tonight, when the president himself was asked on tape about his son and the Russian offer of help during the campaign, he was asked by ABC News anchor in an interview today. The president said something that, once again, is shocking, but this is another one of those things that we will be talking about for a long time to come, because this one has reason to stick.
Today, he was not charged with anything. In retrospect, not only wasn't he charged, if you read it, with all of the horrible fake news. I mean, I was reading that my son was going to go to jail. This is a good young man. He was going to go to jail.
In June of 2016, just months before the election, Don Jr. received an email from a business associate promising dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. Don Jr.'s response, "If it's what you say, I love it." The conversation led to a meeting in Trump Tower that included the president's son, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and a Russian lawyer. Don Jr. insists nothing came of it. And Special Counsel Robert Mueller concluded there was not enough evidence to charge a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia.
And then the report comes out, and they were in the dozen. Going to the FBI when you got that. Okay, let's put yourself in a position, you're a congressman. Somebody comes up and says, "Hey, I have information on your opponent." You call the FBI. I don't think I'll tell you what you do. I've seen a lot of things over my life. I don't think in my whole life I've ever called the FBI. In my whole life, you don't call the FBI. You throw somebody out of your office. You do whatever. How it works out of stolen briefing books, we call the FBI. Well, that's different. There's stolen briefing, but this isn't a stolen. This is somebody that said, "We have information on your opponent." Oh, let me call the FBI. Give me a break. Life doesn't work that way. The FBI director is wrong.
You're taking this type of foreigners from Russia and China. If someone else offers you information on opponent, should be accepted or should they call the FBI?
I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, "We have information on your opponent." I think I want to hear it. It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it. If I thought there was something wrong, I'd go maybe to the FBI. If I thought there was something wrong.
With my election, if I thought there was something wrong with it, maybe I'd go to the FBI. If I thought there was something wrong about it, you have to call the FBI. The FBI director says you have to call the FBI. Well, the FBI director's wrong. I mean, this is not the president flying around on the Access Hollywood bus saying, "Grab him by the genitals, I can get away with it, I'm famous," and then the tape comes out. I mean, this is the president saying on tape. The president has been saying, "No collusion, no collusion." The Russians were trying to help me? Well, I didn't. That wasn't me. This is that same president saying, "Yes, I would want to see information from foreign power." Never mind the FBI director's opinion about that. I mean, again, it's not like this is a hypothetical concept that has never come up before. I mean, literally today, in Congress, in the the Intelligence Committee. Even the Republicans' witness, who the Republicans brought in to try to discredit the whole Russia investigation, even that witness brought in by the Republicans today conceded in the Intelligence Committee literally today that, yeah, you know, if a foreign government comes to you with something, you've got to call the FBI.
Putting yourself in the place of those who receive those contacts, at any of those points, would you have called the FBI?
Well, I yourself, could I have called the FBI?
Yes.
I call the FBI for things probably a lot less serious than that, I imagine. But
Thank you. I do think, however else you feel about the report, do you think someone should have called the FBI? Yes, I think there's no question, and my colleagues here who work in counterintelligence certainly would tell you, we always want information, any information that would be helpful to us in apprising what the likely intentions of potentially hostile powers are.
You're here, called by the Republicans to undermine the whole Russia investigation and the whole Mueller report specifically, but even you admit that when they got contacted by the Russians, they should have called the FBI. Yeah, of course they should have called the FBI. Yes, you call the FBI. You don't take stuff for your campaign from the Russians. Of course you call the FBI. Says the guy the Republicans called today as their expert witness to try to undermine the whole Russia investigation. But as it turns out, what he asserted there about his colleagues who worked in counterintelligence, they did certainly agree with him that, yeah, you don't take stuff from a foreign country. If a foreign country comes to you with something to help you in your campaign, you go to the FBI.
What counterintelligence risk exists when a campaign uses this information about a political opponent that was stolen and released by a foreign adversary? Mr. Anderson.
I can't wait.
Thank you, sir. First of all, it troubles me that no one, if they did not communicate this type of information to some government agency just because of the facts laid out in the report and what you just brought up, and individuals that are giving information, as Stephanie said, are being tasked and then receiving information, that is the initial way that you vet any asset or any person that you're targeting for possible either unwitting asset or recruitment in the future.
I'd just like to add, I think if you're a foreign power and you have a campaign or individuals who are willing to entertain receiving information that you are collecting for their benefit, I think that is a tacit approval of that action. And I think that's where we have to be careful of allowing people to communicate to either a foreign government, a foreign actor, that what they're doing, which is illegal, by hacking and collecting information and then releasing it, giving that kind of approval by a head nod or a suggestion or any kind of inference that it's okay is a tacit approval of that kind of behavior. And I think that puts us at greater risk. Literally today in Congress, there are former senior counterintelligence officials from the FBI talking about how interested in national security matters to take information surreptitiously shot to them from a foreign government. Yeah, that's how you compromise people in the U.S. government. That's how a foreign government, particularly a hostile foreign adversary, would compromise people in the U.S. government. That's how a hostile foreign adversary would conceivably get power over our government. And of course over our elections. But when the sitting president said today, yeah, he'd happily take derogatory information on an opponent from a foreign government in the next election, no, he wouldn't call the FBI. It's interesting. The president, in making those remarks today, he was also fleshing out what the special counsel Robert Mueller investigated as to the potential criminality of the president's campaign taking a meeting in the summer of 2016 at Trump Tower to accept supposed dirt on the Hillary Clinton campaign that was being offered to them by the Russian government. I mean, Mueller investigated that as a potentially criminal act by Trump and his campaign. And in explaining what they found when they investigated that acceptance of an offer of information from the Russian government, Mueller and his team wrote this, quote, "The communications setting up the meeting and the attendance by high-level campaign representatives support an inference that the Trump campaign anticipated receiving derogatory documents and information from official Russian sources that could assist candidate Trump's electoral prospects. This series of events could implicate the federal election law ban on contributions and donations from foreign nationals. The Special Counsel's office considered whether this evidence would establish a conspiracy to violate the foreign contributions ban, the solicitation of an illegal foreign source contribution, or the acceptance or receipt of an express or implied promise to make a foreign source contribution. Quote, there are reasonable arguments that the offered information would constitute a thing of value within the meaning of these provisions. However, to obtain and sustain a conviction on these counts. And why would they not be able to obtain and sustain a conviction for the behavior of the Trump Tower meeting that the upper echelons of the Trump campaign took in June 2016 when the Russian government came to them and said, hey, we've got dirt on Hillary, you want some? Why did they not think they could obtain and sustain a conviction for that behavior by the Trump campaign? Well, they said there was a big problem with potentially trying to bring charges about that. The big problem is that they, quote, did not obtain admissible evidence likely to meet the government's burden to prove...
They're just boring me. So, keep your head on. I got a pen. My friend or land on mama the fucking leg. You trying to be all comfy and cozy and shit. What the heck is over that? Let's see what's on Roku tonight. Let's see what's on the Roku. The Al Roku. What is it doing? Man. Okay, come on. Back out, back. My stomach hurts. I gotta pee. You laying on the bed. I gotta get a little pee. I love you, pet, but I gotta pee, boo. Whew. What's wrong with this picture? I gotta pee and you want